Hi, welcome to this video. My grandkids asked me to do a video about my judo career because they were interested in starting. But as I started putting together this video and going through the information, more and more information came back to me over the years that I did judo from 1966 to 1984. Yeah, a long time ago. Most of you were not born. I've added more and more information as I remember it. And it's hopefully you find it enjoyable, and certainly I hope that you learn something from the video. So let's start off just what actually is judo. So I won't go into too much detail into it. These are stories that were passed to me by Japanese judoka, and obviously this was a verbal transmission. So they told me the stories that they had heard growing up in Japan. And these stories were passed from other people, so there was no internet and virtually no books. So what happened, there was a little guy and his name was Jigero Kano. And Jigero Kano was bullied a lot at school. So I think more than half the world's population can identify with bullying. So he was pretty desperate. And so he went off to the local jiu-jitsu master who was a dentist. And this dentist used pain blocking techniques, so pressure points, in order for him to do his procedures. And so jiu-jitsu is an all-round learning, life learning skill. It can be applied to all sorts of things in medical as well as self-defense, and can be used also for aggression. Anyway, so Jigero Kano, this tiny little guy, he goes off and he begs the guy, and eventually, it's a whole long story, but eventually Jigero Kano gets to learn jiu-jitsu. But half their techniques, or actually way more than half of jiu-jitsu, was unavailable to Jigero Kano. So he was only about 5 foot tall, and he was full grown. He was approximately 100 pounds, right? So very, very small, skinny guy, and he was just completely unable to do most of the techniques. He certainly couldn't go about punching people because they would have just laughed. And so he took the techniques that worked for his body type, and he put this together and created a martial arts which stood on its own when he won the All Japanese Martial Arts competition using what today is called judo. Okay, and the meaning of judo is the gentle way. So you divide it up, it's two words, ju and do, and the word do means the way, and ju means gentle. So the gentle way. Okay, and so this was one man, and he impressed the Emperor of Japan, who then decided to make judo a national sport, that every child must learn judo at school. And to become a mechanical engineer, you would have to have a black belt in judo. And later on in the video, I'll explain a little bit of how that stuck with me when I learned this information, and how we used it to develop judo in our little part of South Africa. Anyway, so judo is the #1 sport in the world. I'm talking about judo is bigger than rugby, it's bigger than football, bigger than tennis. It is practiced by 40 million registered judoka. That means it's probably double that are actually doing judo, but many people do not become licensed and registered and go through the grading systems. So many people go and do judo as just as a recreation, or do it for a while and then stop. Okay, because it is a lifelong commitment. Anyway, judo is practiced in 184 countries. So let's get into my judo career. Okay, so the story starts um, about 58 years ago, pretty long time, right? Okay, so um, it's quite amazing how one person can have such a massive effect on your life and the way your life unfolds. So my parents were selling land. So when I was a young child, there was an area called Randburg, and Randburg was sort of a tiny little uh, intersection with a couple of shops, no more than about six, and there were pretty much there were a few houses, but it was mainly farmlands. And so I grew up in this area and riding horses with my brother, and in a place called Honeydew and so on. We used to ride all over the valley. Anyway, my parents had a real estate company, and how we got to that is a whole sort of chain of events. And this real estate company was called Eagle Estates, and named after the name I was christened with, Gary Eagle. Okay, so um, we started selling, or my parents started selling the land in Blairgowrie, Honeydew, Fairlands, Quillarina, Florida Park extensions 1, 2, and 3, etc. Okay, and so these are just various areas that were local, and they were farmlands, and they carved them up into pieces, and they were busy selling them. And so selling a piece of land is not really a good thing. So my parents built a house on one of the pieces of land which had a pool. And so they were selling 3 or 4 properties a day. And it was hectically busy. And so my parents put me in a show house. So there I was, this tiny little skinny kid, in charge of a show house, and I was just swimming in the pool. And when people arrived at the house, I would be the real estate agent. So selling real estate is pretty simple. You take a person to a house and you walk into the lounge and say, this is the lounge. And then you go into the dining room and say, this is the dining room and this is the kitchen, etc., etc. Because people just need that just in case they get confused and thinks the bedroom's the kitchen. It's quite funny, really. But anyway, so that's what I had to do. And then if the person was interested, I would ask them, are you interested in buying this house? And if they said yes, I would give them my parents' card and tell them my parents are down the road. If they just go down the road to the house with all the boards in front of it, my parents would be happy for them to fill out an offer. So I was the real estate agent, but really I was just a skinny little kid swimming in the pool. And anyway, so this very large man, quite intimidating, by the name of Joe Knoester, he came in the door and he looked at me, and so I showed him through the house and everything. And I think he was more interested in me than he was in the house, to be honest. And when he went down the road to my parents to buy this property, he said to my mother, what sport does this boy do? And it was a joke, really, because obviously you could see I didn't do any sports because I was skinny and I was in a costume. So he didn't have to even try to count my ribs. They were clearly on display. And I had knobbly knees and virtually no calf muscles. And yeah, so I was just this like walking skeleton. And So my mother told him, "Oh no, I do Sea Scouts." Well, how he didn't pack up laughing, I don't know. How do you have Sea Scouts 600 kilometers from the sea? But what I did is I learned to sail a yacht on Florida Lake, which is a pretty small lake, which was nearby. Okay, so this was how we first heard about judo. No one in our family knew it even existed. We never knew anything about it. There was no judo in schools or anything. Um, Joe Knoester said to my mother, "This boy needs to do judo. Bring him to my club and I will sort him out." So my mother bundled me in the car and off we went on a road trip to a place called Krugersdorp. And Krugersdorp had a very big mine called Durban Deep Mine. And I was born in Durban, so quite unusual that the mine would be called Durban Deep Mine, 600 kilometers from Durban, but that's what it was called. And there's a picture of it for you to have a look at, while the actual mining rig. So we went to this little hall, and it was pretty scary for me. We walked in, I was clutching my mother's hand and I was sort of hiding behind her leg, and there was about 40 or so a judoka, all making a big noise, running around and screaming, and because the class hadn't started, so the kids were just on there, all busy making a big noise. Some were doing break falls, others were doing uchikami, and others were just being hooligans. And little groups were standing around chatting about their week or whatever. But all in Afrikaans, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I don't speak Afrikaans. Here I am, and English boy in an Afrikaans judo club. Anyway, so my mother signs all the papers and invests the money and buys me a judo suit. So and then I go and struggle to put the judo belt on, which is a bit complicated because it's a reef knot. It's got to go around twice, and presented myself to the club. And then, yeah, these boys were absolutely horrible to me. I was beaten up. I was bullied. I was sworn at. Seeing my grandkids are busy watching, I'm not going to say the words. And anyway, so I started doing judo. Okay, I was 8 years old and I weighed 23 kilograms, so I was a tiny little guy. And so little by little, I started to learn. Eventually, Joe graded me my yellow belt. I'm very proud of myself with my yellow belt, and I started to achieve some sort of success. My father didn't believe in judo. He refused to come to the classes. Didn't want to hear anything about it. He actually had a fight with my mother and told her it was a complete waste of time. But during the bullying phase, when I wanted to give up, my father was very angry, said that they'd spent all this money on the judo suit. I don't know how much it was, but in those days, money was different to today. And that now that I had a suit, I wasn't allowed to give up. So there was no giving up. He'd invested money in the suit, and so that was it. So I had to just keep on going. So after 9 months of bullying and abuse, um, Joe entered me into a competition. Now, Joe had a problem with me because I was so little and so weak. I just couldn't do judo like all the other kids. So he decided, I'm a right-handed person. I'm right-footed, right-handed. I think right-handed. I'm 100% right-handed. But Joe decided that my advantage in judo would be if I was southpaw. If I was a lefty, then my opponents would be thrown. And not quite the right word on a judo video. Not well, they would get thrown, but they would be thrown off of their stride because a lefty stands the wrong way. So a right-sided judoka stands with their right shoulder forward, right foot forward. But a lefty stands with their left foot forward. And so this is something I had to learn. And he just said, right, from now on, you are left-handed. You are going to do judo left-handed. So this made a huge difference. I became, not only was I a weird kid, skinny, but I now had a weird fighting stance because I fought left-handed. Okay, but what my opponents didn't know is that my power was right-handed. So I would do the whole fight. Every part of the fight, I would stand left-handed. I would attack left-handed, and if they weren't awake, I would catch them with left-handed techniques. But I could easily just swap at any point and then really apply my power to right-handed. And that was history because it would be so unexpected. Later on, as my judo career went through, people and coaches could see through this, and so I would do this left technique that I had, being southpaw, but they would train the people, the judoka who are going to fight me. Their coaches would teach them that the right is coming. Okay, so they'd be waiting for it. Okay, which is not a good situation to be in, but so that had its problems. So Joe entered me into a tournament, just 9 months, and I entered into the Transvaal Judo Championships with my yellow belt, and I won a silver medal in the under 27 kilogram category. And then my father showed a little bit of excitement when I came home with my little cup. I think it was about that big. It was the tiniest little thing. Actually, it was a little bit bigger. It had a plastic black part and the silver cup, and in those days, real silver. So the Chinese hadn't started making plastic figurines and all that sort of stuff at that point. Okay, so I just want to run through what judo has. Now, specifically, judo has an unusual thing is that they have obviously gold medal is the person who comes first, and the silver medal is the person who comes second. But judo generally has two bronze medalists. Okay, and that depends on the size of the pool and the way the pools are set up. Okay, so I'm not talking about a swimming pool. I'm talking about the judo pool. These are the number of judokas. So let's just say in higher weight groups, there could be 8 or less judoka. So what I've got on the screen is a system called the repechard system, and this is something that is used in judo throughout the world. Okay, so there's 8 judoka in a line. So as you can see, there's light blue, orange, purple, yellow, green, some other light green, and another light green. So we're not going to worry about those, but let's just look at the very top guy at the top. So the first two, light blue and dark blue, have a fight, okay, and light blue wins. Okay, then below that you'll see that orange and pink fight, and orange wins, moves forward. So then orange fights blue, okay, but blue wins, so orange is knocked out. Okay, and so you can see the blue goes all the way through to the first. Now, any person could make their way through to the first, depending on how the fights are laid out. Okay, so what you will notice, though, is watch what happens to the yellow, how yellow goes through, and then yellow becomes second, okay, because yellow loses to blue. Okay, so yellow is lost, and so yellow has then got to face the repechage. So all the people that have lost a fight fight together, okay, and have a chance. But if you lose to a person who loses to somebody else, then you're knocked out. Okay, so but if the person that you lost to ends up first or second, then you get a chance to fight again. So you'll see that blue only in the 8 pool, the blue had 3 fights and then was first. Okay, whereas the silver and bronze person did um, uh, 4 fights each to get through. Okay, and if there's 16 people, you just have 1 extra fight. So notice that 8 judoka, you have 3 fights to fight to gold medal. If there's 16, you have 4 fights. If there's 32, you have 5 fights. Now in juniors, generally the pools are big. Somewhere between 16 and 30 is normal. Okay, so if you're going to win gold medal, you need to be strong and fit enough to withstand 5 fights. And in juniors, that would be 3-minute fights. In seniors, that would be longer, so 5-minute fights. Okay, all right, so your fitness and your endurance has got to be up for that. Okay, so that makes it pretty tough. Okay, so my parents had finished selling all the properties in Fairlands, Blair Gowrie, and so on. And so we moved to greener pastures. So off we went to Natal. And I joined the local YMCA judo club, which was nearby. And this was run by a local traffic cop, and his name was Peter Burns. And it was actually quite funny. So it looked like he had Tourette's, but basically Peter Burns had been a traffic cop riding on a motorcycle for many, many years. And so what he did is he had this tick where he used to rev his bike and change gears with his foot. So he would stand on one leg and he would kick his foot to the side and he would twitch his wrist like he's accelerating on his bike. So it was quite funny, but he was a very, very kind person, and he put a lot of effort into judo. So I have very fond memories of Peter Burns, though he was a black belt, but he was not a very good judoka. But we've got to take into account where the world was in those days. Anyway, so he entered me into Natal Championships under 30 kgs, and I demolished the other judoka. So he immediately graded me orange belt. I didn't deserve to be an orange belt, but he certainly couldn't have me with my yellow belt winning the Natal Championships because it made all the other instructors look like idiots, and that I would come in there and be able to beat all these higher grades. So he quickly graded me up to orange. At that point, I was using a technique called Tayatoshi, but on the left side. Okay, well, my judo career started to become a bit more exciting. Okay, so this world champion by the name of Willem Ruska, he came to South Africa and to promote judo in Africa. And we had a training camp, and I was lucky enough to be on it. Now, Willem was by far the biggest man I've ever seen. He made Arnold Schwarzenegger look like a toothpick. He was a monster of a man. He's the second biggest man to come out of Holland, and his coach was this monster of a guy, and who was the first person ever to beat the Japanese in the heavyweight division. And then he trained Willem, and again Willem became world champion and Olympic champion. So he came and he trained us, and it was fantastic. My eyes were open. But this camp wasn't just for a few little kids in a club. This was a camp for South African judo. So there were all the great guys. My long time, I hadn't seen Joe Knoester. He came down. Simon Buerta, all the big boys from Joburg, all the top players in the country came down and to have this camp with Willem. And so one of the highlights that I will never forget during this camp was when we had the South African senior and junior teams all lined up in a row. Okay, so 6 or 7 members of the senior team and about 14 members of the lower team, the junior team. So from the smallest guy, under 27 kgs, all the way up to heavyweight, and then the seniors, and they all lined up, and Willem then had a fight. He started with the biggest and moved to the smallest, which he made an excuse that it would be easier on him rather than have the big guys last, have the big guys first. And Willem fought every single person in a row. And so it was, yeah, absolutely incredible to see this guy. I mean, he just, the best in South Africa, he just threw them all over the place like they were nothing. And then the juniors. And as he got lower and lower and lower down, he got more and more and more gentle, obviously, and he adjusted his judo so beautifully to us children. And then we had this tiniest little person. I'd already started to get a bit bigger and fell out a little bit. We had this tiny kid at the end. I can't remember, like 20 kgs or 25 kgs, and this little boy did an attack, and Willem let him throw him over, and bang, this big man fell on the mat. It was absolutely awesome. Anyway, and then Willem did a grading, and he graded many students, and I had this opportunity to go in front of him and do my stuff. And then we had like a party at the end, and obviously I was just a kid, but I was able to stay up a bit for it. And my mom and dad were there, and all the rest of it. And so there was dancing and lots of drinking. Willem was at that point in time drinking about 11 pints of beer per day. In order to maintain this big body, he would, if I remember right, he would have something like 2 500-gram steaks and 12 eggs per day to maintain this incredibly powerful big body. He's basically an eating and drinking machine. And when he did judo, the most incredible thing I'd ever seen is that his wife would be there, and his kids were there too. His wife would be there to change his judo suit. So in a 2-hour session, he would change his judo jacket about 3 times. They would change color. They were so full of sweat. And the entire judo mat was covered in sweat. When you were doing judo with him, and especially groundwork, his sweat was busy dripping on your face, off the end of his nose. He just sweated the whole time. I think he had to get the 11 beers out of his system, but he had to drink more that evening so that his body would be able to produce so much sweat the next day. So I think he lost a couple of kilos every single day. So it was an incredible experience. And so I got to go to the South African Championships in the Natal team. And though I won my bouts in my weight division, our team didn't do as well as expected, and we came third. So that was the first time I got my Natal colors. and that was pretty exciting stuff. Well, my judo was sort of stuck. Um, I'd learned everything that Peter Burns could possibly teach me, and that wasn't much. Um, I enjoyed going. Loved my judo. My mom would be the old faithful. My dad would take me occasionally if my mother was busy, but it was pretty stuck. And we heard about this guy called Titch James. I still to this day don't know what his first name was. I'm sure it wasn't Titch. But anyway, so Titch James lived in a place called Kloof, and he had a judo mat in his garage. And he one of his top students with a black belt was a guy called Dirk Blondeel. And anyway, so my parents moved me there because they were very worried that here I was an Natal judo champion and everything, and I was being pushed up the judo ranks. But to be honest, I wasn't very good at judo as far as learning technique. Okay. Anyway, so I carried on my judo career. I learned a lot, and I swapped from forward throws to backward throws, and Kawachigari, Owachigari, and Osotogari were my dominant techniques that I was using, and I became very good at combining a forward throw with Owachigari to throw backwards. And I got some really good ippons, so throwing the person completely off the ground backwards is not the easiest thing to achieve. Generally, it's a takedown type technique, but I really enjoyed it, and you can see there's a picture of an Ouchigari there. You'll notice that there's not many pictures of me, and the main reason that there are not many pictures of me is that number one, we didn't have digital, so we couldn't take digital pictures. Pictures had to be taken with a camera, and then the spool had to be taken off to a special place to be produced. It was expensive, which my parents were not. They could afford it, but they just didn't. So we had very few pictures. We had photos, but very few pictures. And though there were pictures of me throughout my judo career, my mother, I never bothered with them, and my mother eventually threw them out when she got older. So there's very few pictures left of those days, and obviously it wasn't digital, and there was no internet to have things on. So they lay around in some albums, and nobody knows whatever happened to them. So my judo was coming along nicely, but the problem is that my body wasn't up to it. So my mother took me to a Pinetown doctor, Dr. Kuffman. He was a real doddering old fart. And he was ready for retirement. Probably 20 years before that, he was ready for retirement. But he prescribed Periactin Vita syrup, which was a antihistamine. So the medicine is for people with allergies. But if you read the fine print on the product, it says this will increase your appetite and you will experience weight gain. So perfect side effect for me. So we started taking this stuff, started making my own protein powder or protein drink because there was no protein powders available. So we would mix eggs, banana, peanut butter, and milk together, and with some honey, and put this in a blender and make a protein drink. Okay, I was doing weight training, but I was still very low body fat. So one day after a workout, I went and sat in the sauna for about 30 minutes. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a wonderful training session. The sauna was fantastic, but I came out and when I went for the shower, I put the shower on pretty cold. It wasn't ice cold, but it was pretty cold. And I stepped into the cold water. I immediately lost consciousness. So I remember falling. There was a man inside of the change room, and he heard this thud, and then he banged on the door. And in my fog, I could hear this voice saying, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And anyway, so he was then started to panic. He rushed off and he got the gym owner, and the gym owner came, and I was not responding. The shower was running and I was lying over the drain, and so they were worried I would drown. And because the water was now coming out of the shower over the step to go into the shower, and the water was pouring out and wetting the whole change room. And so they tried to push the door, and I was on the other side. Eventually, someone climbed over the wall into the booth and pulled me away from the door so that they could actually get it open and get to me. So with all this, the gym owner was traumatized, his customers were traumatized, and I was banned from going back to the gym, never to return. Which was pretty bad because it was the only gym within about a 20-kilometer radius of where we were. And that stimulated us to build our own gym, but that's another story which we'll get to. So I increased my body weight from about 40 kgs to 60 kgs in a 2-year period. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let's just carry on with the story. So we left Titch behind and we moved on to Selwyn Peterson. Okay, so Selwyn was a very senior judoka. I mean, senior in years, and he did Kodokan Judo, stood up straight, no rough and tumble, and exceptional at doing Harai Goshi, which is a really big throw, not suited for my body type at all. So he taught me how to do Sio Toshi, which was his brother Vernon Peterson. He had a famous judo club called Kaiora. I thought Kaiora was some special Japanese word, but actually turned out to be the name of the road where his home was, and their judo club was also in their garage. It was a very common thing at that time that judoka converted their two-car garage into a judo hall. And what would happen is the judo mats were really interesting. So in these old days, there was no place to buy judo mats, and there was no factories that made materials that you could use. So what you did is you put a strip of wood, probably like 100 mil by 100 mil plank, across the entrance to your garage. This would be screwed down onto the floor, and then you would get truckloads of sawdust from the timber mill, and you would pour that into this hole that you'd made now. So there are 3 walls of the garage, and then there's a strip of wood, and you would throw all the sawdust in, you would rake it flat, and then you would put some masonite, very thin, like wood, plywood type of stuff would be, but it was a bit softer than plywood. Plywood was a bit hard, and it was very thin. And you put it on top. Some places just didn't put anything on top, just had sawdust. Other places put like cardboard on top of the sawdust. And then you would have a big sail, a piece of canvas, which you would pull tight using some rope and some hooks on a frame that would be around the room, and you pull this canvas tight. And then you would do judo on it, and then after about a month, the judo mat would, every single time you walked on it or threw someone on it or grappled on it, would get harder and harder, and the sawdust would get more and more and more compressed, and eventually the sawdust would be as hard as a piece of wood. And so then what you would do is take the canvas off, And with a spade, you toss all the sawdust and make it all nice and airy again, and then rake it and put the canvas down. So judo was not a place for a person with sinus problems because of the sawdust. So some people just couldn't do judo because when you went into a South African judo club in those days, you would be dying with sinuses. Okay, so anyway, so my weight started picking up, and I was now at this massive weight, 45 kilos. I was huge, and I was graded a blue belt. And my dad started doing judo. So what a turnaround from the beginning, when the old man was like opposed to judo, complete waste of time. Judo's Japanese, it's not Christian. They do bowing and all sorts of strange things. And he was opposed to me doing it. And now, a few years later, my dad is starting to do judo. Okay, so my dad had a bit of a dream, but at this point he wasn't sharing it with me. What to do? Okay, so we learned from everybody we can. I've changed clubs. I'm running out of clubs to go to now. So we've come to the end of the road in KZN, one of South Africa's biggest provinces, and I've travelled all over trying to gain skills. So my father, his job was called ship jumping. Ship jumping is a very dangerous occupation. What a ship jumper did is you would go out on a small boat to a big ship that is so big it can't fit in the harbour, and then they would put a net over the side, and then in the small boat you would wait, and every seventh wave, if you don't know that, every seventh wave is a big wave. So there's 6 small waves, and then a seventh on the ocean is a big wave. So you would count the waves, identify, okay, this is the major wave, and then you would wait for the next one. So you would be ready, okay? And 7 waves later, you would get this big wave, and you would jump from the boat onto the ship. Okay, and I'm just using boat and ship so you realize that boat is like 30,000 ton, which most people would think is a ship, and then the ship is a super tanker of 250,000 ton or 500,000 ton, or even the Globetic Tokyo, which is 1 million tons of crude oil, the biggest ship ever built. Okay, so we would come next to these with a boat, and I say we because my father used to take me ship jumping. Okay, so it's extremely dangerous, and my whole life my father never learned to swim. So he jumped from one boat, which is safe, to a ship, which is very safe. The Globetic Tokyo was 1.5 kilometers long from front to back, and you could fit 11 football fields on the deck of the ship. That's how big it was. Okay, and anyway, so if you fell between the boat and the ship, you were dead. It was a life-threatening thing. Anyway, so we decided we needed to get more information. And right in the beginning, I said to you that the Emperor of Japan made judo compulsory, and you couldn't become an engineer unless you had a black belt. So I remembered this from early stories that I'd heard. And so what we did is we learned some rudimentary Japanese. So you could say a simple thing like konnichiwa, okay, ikaga desu ka, and a few other phrases and so on. And so we learned these things, and my dad was much better at it than me. I'm not really a language person, and I'm more science and engineering and mathematics. And anyway, so we then would jump ships or go onto ships in the Durban harbour. And what would happen is we'd go on board the ship, and we'd go and we would speak to these people. But Japanese people on Japanese ships in those days never spoke English. Maybe one person or 2 people. So we'd go on board and ask to speak to the chief engineer, and we'd get hold of this person with really broken Japanese. So I would say something like Watashi wa judoka, right? I am a judo player, okay? Anata wa judo sensei. So it's you are a judo sensei, right? And then to make it a question, like, are you a judo sensei? You put the word ka on the end, okay? So I would say, Anata wa judo sensei ka, right? And then this is my rudimentary, any Japanese person would pack up laughing at my use of Japanese. Anyway, and they would look at you and say, Coca-Cola? And like, how did he get, do you want a Coca-Cola out of all of that? Basically, he didn't want to be rude and had no idea what you were trying to say. And then we'd say, judo. And he'd look at us like, and they'd say, judo. Judo, and then all of a sudden he'd say, judo, right? That's what I've been saying for the last 10 minutes. And then he'd rush off to go and get some guy out of the engine room. And this guy would come up and he's like wiping grease off of his hands with a cloth, and he'd come into the captain's cabin and then he'd say, judo, and then we would take him off the ship. And that was another whole thing because they didn't understand what was going on. And so we would take them off the ship and we would phone around all the judo clubs and we'd say, we've got a Japanese guy, says he can do judo. And everybody would come running to the judo hall, and then this guy would teach us. And many, many times they knew nothing. They would be at a level of a yellow or a white belt as far as we were concerned. But some of them were just ordinary people who worked on a ship, and they were like judo masters, like we had never come across skill sets like we found on just ordinary Japanese people who were going about doing their job. So it was pretty exciting. And later on, there was this guy called Kyuso Mifune. He was the first judoka trained by Jigero himself, who went into the West and spread judo and trained the president of the United States to do judo. So we tried hard to learn more about judo from our local perspective. So in everybody's career, you have to start somewhere. So we, um, that's my father and I, we made the first mobile judo mats in our province or state, if you like. So what we did is we got rubber of different grades, and we got contact adhesive. We glued them together, and then we got vinyl and we wrapped them. And we created these judo mats, and we made the judo mats so they fitted in our car. So my dad loved big cars. One of our early cars that we had, it was totally ridiculous. It was called a Valiant. It was a massive, big car. American cars were a big thing. And anyway, Ford Ranchero, there's a picture of it below, and it was a pretty big car, and it had this massive bin, much bigger than what we would call a bucky, or in New Zealand they'd call it a ute. This had a very big bin, and so we designed our judo mats to go in it. But the judo mats couldn't really be small enough to go in, so the tailgate had to be left down, so the judo mats stuck out and were on the tailgate. But a judo mat would be made up of quite a lot of biscuits. We call these biscuits, and these biscuits would fit together in a pattern, so they had to be small enough that you could carry them, but not too small that you would have thousands of the things. So we designed them so they fitted inside of our car, our Ford Ranchero. Okay, so we started off in the garage at home. We built up a few students, and then we got our first judo club, which was at Thomas More College in a place called Kloof. And so uh, uh, they were keen for judo to be brought into the school. Judo was busy growing in South Africa. It was not a household term. Most people, when you said you did judo, that was like, what is that? Never heard of it before. Some strange thing. And so they allowed us to use their squash courts. Now, if you played squash, you know a squash court's pretty small. And with judo, it's pretty active sport. And obviously, if you hit a wall, you could become seriously injured. So to try and get a judo mat and have a class inside of a squash court was quite difficult. So, but we were targeting quite small kids at this point, so I began teaching as a blue belt with our first um, club being called Kogi Judo Club. Okay, so the Department of Sport was had quite a lot of challenges. So South Africa, due to their political affiliations and so on, were facing sanctions. Our sportsmen were barred from going to the Olympics and things like that, make it very difficult for a young sportsman like myself when we were sort of cut off from international recognition and so on. So the Department of Sport, the South African Department of Sport, wanted to make judo part of the national uh, um, sports portfolio, that we would become a major player in the world of judo. So we didn't have any formal structure. So we had a bunch of clubs. So each province had a handful of clubs with very small classes, and everything was not very well coordinated because basically the judo was just a hit and miss thing that went along, and there was no structure. So they commissioned Jean Pujol. So I don't know all his information. I can't really remember, but uh, eventually Jim Pujol was a sixth dan at judo. He got his fourth dan in the Kodokan, which is an incredible accomplishment. To get graded fourth dan in Japan in the Kodokan, the Judo University of Japan, that is an incredible accomplishment for any judoka. There's only a few non-Japanese people to have been awarded such a thing. He was a black belt in judo. He was a red sash in North Siloam. Let's try that again. North Siloam Kung Fu. He was European judo champion, and he was in his younger years in the French Foreign Legion as a martial arts instructor. So he was employed by the South African Department of Sport to set up the judo syllabus. So he wrote a book. And there's a copy of it on the screen for you to have a look at. So my parents said, we off for our holidays, we're going to go to Mozambique. Okay, so this is some years ago, since Mozambique has changed to Maputo. And this was before their revolution that they had, and all sorts of drama in the country. So back in these days, Mozambique was a beautiful, peaceful place, and so we went there to have a beach holiday. Some of the highlights of Mozambique is their seafood. So they have these Mozambican prawns, which was sort of like this big, and you would go down to the beach in the morning, and these Mozambicans would go into the ocean with sort of a round sieve, which they would push into the sand, lift it up, and it would have like 20 of these things. The world was a different place. We didn't have chemical pollution and all the rest of it. And so they would pull these out, and you would for pennies, you would buy 2 dozen prawns. Then you would set up your kadak skottel, which is like a braai or a barbecue, if you like, and you would cook your prawns on there with garlic and butter, and that would be breakfast. Pretty much 100% prawns, costing you less than 2 or 3 eggs. Anyway, and it was a beautiful place. And I had the book, right, which I showed you earlier. And so I had my grading for brown belt coming up. And so my father, who was doing judo with me, we were doing judo together on the beach. And my mother had the book, and she was busy reading the things out. So we would go through yellow belt, orange belt, green belt, blue belt, and brown belt techniques every single day on the beach. Now, while we were doing this, my mother looked over the top of the book, and she said to me, "You know that guy lying over there on the beach with his wife and kids? That guy looks like this guy in the book." And so we all looked at him, and my father and I looked at the guy in the picture in the book and said, "Nah, it can't be. He's French. He lives in France. What would he be doing in Mozambique? Nah, it can't be." Anyway, my mother nagged me. She said, "Go and ask him." So I walked over to this man and I said, are you Jean Pujol?" And he looked at me and he said, "My name is Jean Pujol." Something like that. Anyway, so I immediately assumed, okay, it's not him. So I turned away, started walking back up the beach, and then realized he just said Jean Pujol in French. And so I turned back and I said, "I'm a judoka, I'm busy learning your technique." And he said, "Yes, we saw you and is that your father, doing some judo on the sand." So I said, "I've got my brown belt coming up." And anyway, so my parents came over. So I waved my arms frantically and they came over. And my parents invited him to go to the most famous restaurant in Lorenzo Marques, which was the capital of Mozambique at the time. And my parents invited them to dinner. So, and paid for them to have a seafood dinner at this famous restaurant. And anyway, so Jean offered to train me every day if I went on down to the beach at 6 a.m. sunrise, and go down to the beach, and he would train me for an hour every day for the next 2 weeks. So we kept doing this, and sort of as payment, but more than was just my parents being friendly, and they were very nice people, Gene and his wife and his kids. And so I trained with them in the mornings, and then we would hook up. They came to us. We were staying in a caravan park, so and we had a tent and whatnot. And they would come over and have drinks and stuff, and then every morning he would train me. Sorry about the dog. So that was my introduction to Jean Pujol and how he trained me in Mozambique. Here is a picture of what Mozambique sort of looked like back in those days. Okay, so at the end of our holiday, Jean said to my parents, "I'm going to Johannesburg and for the Department of Sport, and I'm doing a course, and I would like your son to join." So my dad said, because remember, my father was in real estate. So it's quite easy to adjust your time and when you work and so on. So my father said, no problem at all. We'll come up to Joburg and my son can come on the course. So in the picture, you'll see that this is Jean Pujol's um, uh, Kodokan certificate for his fourth Dan black belt, which he got. Incredible achievement. So anyway, so we arrive at this big hall, and all the fourth, fifth, sixth Dans in South Africa are there to be taught by Jean Pujol and to run through the South African judo syllabus. And the whole thing was arranged by the Department of Sport. So in we walk. Jean is nowhere to be seen. We walk in and we get blocked at the door. Like, sorry, can we help you? So I said, I've come to train with Jean. And they said, oh, sorry, this is closed to senior instructors only. And so my dad said, well, we've been invited. Anyway, with that, Jean arrives. And he walks in and he says, like, he was like a very irritable sort of guy, could get like very angry really quickly. And he's like, what's the matter? What's the problem? So they said, this is a closed thing paid for by the Department of Sport and it's not for children. And so Jean Pujol got really angry and he said, either he is on the course or I walk. And they said, but you have a contract to teach judo in South Africa. You're being paid. And he said, I don't care. I walk. I go back to France. So anyway, they realized that, okay, this is the whole thing, a whole week's course is going to be ruined in the first 5 minutes. So they said, okay, fine. And actually it turned out to be perfect because Jean was going to do the entire judo syllabus. Okay, so if he did each technique once, I would be thrown about 100 times because I was going to be his uki. Okay, so I was a young, strong kid and all these old men were learning from him. And if I wasn't being thrown, they were going to be thrown. So they soon realized that actually having me on the course was absolutely of primary importance. So, and they were an odd number as well. So that meant one of them didn't have a partner. So I was an uki to one of these senior instructors. And I changed through most of them. Every time we got together, Jean would make sure we got different partners. Every training session, every training technique we trained. So, yeah, he threw the hell out of me. And many of the techniques he did 5, 6, 7 times. So I probably got thrown over 1,000 times during the week. But I learned a tremendous amount. And then Jean Pujol graded me brown belt, and I was fully up to speed. I was then the only official South African recognized brown belt on this Department of Sports syllabus, and purely because, not because I was super duper special, but because I happened to be graded on that first introductory launch of the South African judo syllabus. So things got even worse for South African judo. And I'm just going to go over it just lightly, a little bit of what was going on. But we basically had a revolution. So things got a bit crazy with the Department of Sport and who was recognized, who was not recognized. So there was a split in South African judo. Half the instructors went off. So we had the South African Amateur Judo Association. And then we had the South African National Amateur Judo Association. And then we were split. And then later there was SAJU, which is the South African Judo Union. Third one, this is an amalgamation. So with all this going on, Natal Judo was in a terrible state. We only had a few clubs to start with, and now they were split. So my parents ran an association called the Natal Amateur Judo Association, NAJA. My dad was the chairman, my mom was the secretary, and we had another person who was the treasurer. I can't remember who they were, to be honest. So underneath this, I became an official referee. So my parents got me on a referee's course in Johannesburg. This is to become a referee for the South African Championships. I passed the theory and I passed the practical, but the rules stated that you had to be over 16. And at this point in time, I wasn't. So though I was an official referee, I was not allowed to ref. But in Natal, I refed a lot. So Orange Free State, open under 46 kgs. Okay, as you can see, my weight is busy going up. I've got a few extra muscles. And so I entered into the Bloemfontein Open. Okay, so difference between a closed and an open. Closed is only for people who live in that province. So Orange Free State Championships is only for people who live in the Free State. Orange Free State Open Championships means that it's open to other provinces. So people from Durban would travel, people from Joburg would travel, people from the Cape would travel. Okay, so we would be traveling for about 4 or so hours to Bloem. And so we traveled during the night. Okay, so some of the other people, the driver, he was in the seniors, and there were 4 of us in this car in various weight categories. Okay, and weigh-in was at 7 a.m. the next morning. So we arrive in Bloem in the middle of the night. We don't pay for accommodation or anything. We sleep in the car, so we get a few Zs. Not good, so wake up tired in the morning. And then the weigh-in is at 7. So I go and get on the scale, and because of my training, because of the periactin vita, I am overweight by 500 grams. 500 grams is one hell of a lot of weight to lose in 1 hour. So they give me 1 hour to reweigh. Otherwise, I'm disqualified and can't fight. Okay, so we shoot to the supermarket. We get some plastic, like cling wrap. We didn't have cling wrap in those days, but it was some plastic. Wrap me up, put my judo suit on, buy a bag of lemons, and what I've got to do is I got to run around a sports field. Okay, so the judo competition was at a university, so there was a nice sports track, and I would run around there. And what would happen is that as I run, I would stop, suck on the lemon, and spit all the saliva out. I could not swallow my saliva because that saliva will be in my body for the next hour. So I've got to spit. So it would be suck a lemon, spit, run. Suck a lemon, spit, run. At 5 minutes to the close of weight, the guys helping me said, right, you got to go away. Okay, running into the thing, running on the spot, standing there in the gym, people everywhere, stripped totally naked, and jump onto the scale. And this is a balanced scale, right? So this is a proper scale, not like a stupid little bathroom thing. This is a balanced scale with a boom, and it's got weights hanging on it. Okay, and they certified and they have a certificate that this thing weighs correct, right? And I stand on it and I'm 200 grams over. Now what do we do? So I've lost 300 grams and I have 5 minutes to lose 200 grams. So I'm going to tell you how you lose 200 grams in 60 seconds. This is like magic. Okay, so into the showers, handstand against the wall, totally naked. Okay, a group of men, like 5 or 6, standing around. And what they do is they take their hands and they rub your skin down towards your head really hard. Okay, so even though I'm pretty fit, I'm struggling to hold myself up. And once or twice, my arms collapsed from my weight and them doing this. So they're actually rubbing my skin like this, okay? Very, very vigorously. So my whole body is red and I'm upside down. My face is red and they're shaking all my blood down into my hands and my face. Okay. And then I had to stay like a statue. So these 4 or 5 men tip me and carry me like a statue with my hands still above my head. I was not allowed to move at all. I was like a plank. They then ran me through the change rooms, okay, and still naked in the air, and then turned me. The scale is ready. Everybody stand back. Stand me on the scale. Watch the scale. 1, 2, 3. The scale's busy moving because these men just dumped me on it, right? And then as the scale stops moving, I'm under. And immediately the guy says, you're under, jump off the scale. Because not 30 seconds later, the 200 grams is back. Okay, so now I've made the weight and I've now got to try and get myself ready. So off back to the chemist, we buy some vitamins and some cornstarch to give my body some energy, and then I put on my judo suit. I put my tracksuit, which is sopping, over the top of it, and just to make me really warm. The guys have rubbed deep heat all over my back and my arms, so my body can try and recover from all the running, an hour of running plus exercises, and for my body to recover. So I managed to get a little bit of sleep on the side of the judo mat, and then some mates came and shook me, woke me up, and said, it's time for your fight. So pretty much just getting the sleep out of my head, and I walked onto the mat. So I managed to get 3rd place. It was not a fun experience. Anyway, so there you go. This is part of what judo is about. Okay, so I was busy growing, getting more experience, learning. So my parents, who were running the Natal Amateur Judo Association, decided that what we needed to do is run some camps open to the whole of South Africa, and to bring in some really good instructors who would come through and provide us with training. So we hired a place called Sidara. This is an agricultural center in the middle of KZN, and we employed Simon Botha, incredible judoka, and some of his students, Teuns and Hennie Fraser. Actually, it was quite interesting that on the 1 year, Hennie came and his hand was all bandaged up. And what had happened is him and Teuns were skylarking, messing around, and they had a bit of a rough and tumble. And Hennie was chasing Teuns and through a house, and Teuns pulled the door closed. And as Hennie was running, he hit the door, the back of the door, but his fingers, he grabbed the door, and as his weight pushed the door closed, he chopped his fingers off. And so the ends of his fingers were all chopped right off. And so the doctor came up with this miraculous plan that they would grow the fingers back. So what they did is they made like little caps that went on his finger, and then these, like, they were like thimbles, rubber thimbles, and they would fill them up with honey, and then he would put his finger inside honey, and then every day he would take it off, clean it, replace the honey, and then put it back on. And he grew his fingers back. Now, this was so amazing that I never forgot it my whole life. I couldn't believe it. And then my wife and I, Janet and I, rehabilitated a horse that had run through a barbed wire fence, and all its muscles were shredded. And we actually built the horse's leg back across many months of applying raw honey to the wound, and all the muscles grew back, and then the skin grew back over the top of the muscles, which had grown back um, by the use of honey. So honey is pretty amazing. So it's something that I learned at Sadara, which I carried with me for the rest of my life, and I've always had an affinity. I don't eat honey, but I've always had an affinity to the miracles of the things that are on our planet, and I love bees. Anyway, so we had these judo camps, and they would be for a week. Basically, well, they were full time, so we would wake up early. They had this like big triangle which they would hit with a metal pipe, and ding, 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 ding at 5 a.m. in the morning. We'd all jump up and throw on our tracksuits and our running shoes, and off we'd go running through the farms and up onto the hill, and then back down. Then we would have a shower, a report for breakfast in the mess hall, prepared by all the moms. Then we would do judo instruction and some fighting till 12. Then we'd have a long lunch. And then in the afternoon, we would do theory training as our bodies cooled down. And then in the evening, we would watch videos. I say videos. Video hadn't been invented, so we had a camera. So I don't know if you've seen old cameras. This has got two reels, and it makes a big noise. It goes as all the little frames go by, and there's a thing that turns around, makes the shutters open and close. So, and we would watch judo movies of Mifune doing kata and things like that. It was really something out of this world that we were able to share as a group. And I attended 4 of these camps for consecutive years. So we had it, and it was very, very popular. So depending on the year, there were between 60 and 100 judoka attending these camps. And so I really appreciate Simon Buerta and Teuns Fraser. Hennie only came the once, and for dedicating their time and effort to developing judo. Unknown to me, there was a judoka in Johannesburg by the name of Frank Smith, and Frank had was a third dan at judo, and unknown to me, and he was a somebody in judo South Africa. But when he was sent to go and learn from the Japanese, and he went for a year to Japan, he arrived there and realized that a third dan in South Africa was equivalent of sort of a blue or a green belt in Japan. So he was at the Kodokan. The judo starts early in the morning, very much like our Sadara camp, 6 in the morning with a 10K run where they'd start, and then they do judo the whole day till 6 o'clock. And Frank Smith was finished. Most South Africans are part-timers. So what I mean by that is they do judo 2 or 3 times a week, and then they do normal life the rest of the time. Whereas the Japanese at the Kodokan are doing judo every single day, and they do judo for the whole day, not just an hour's worth of judo in the evening, but the whole day. And Frank Smith was absolutely blown away by what they could do, and so he started off. He was finished every single day. Even the white belts could beat him with his third dan, and but by the time he got to the end of his 9 months, he could pretty much speak Japanese, and because he stayed with the Japanese people, and he became extremely fit, training with Japanese Olympic team. So when I met Frank Smith to do this camp, a week's camp, he was doing 100 push-ups and 200 sit-ups in a session, and every judo session that he did, and he inspired me to do lots of sit-ups, and I built myself up to 900 sit-ups per day, and my dream was to try and break the world record, which was 26,000 sit-ups without a break. And obviously that's totally ridiculous. And but 1,000 sit-ups was very easy for me to do. And so after his training, him, Eddie Stashak, and two other black belts, and I can't remember their names, were the grading panel. And a very unusual thing happened, is that throughout the world, a senior black has to be 16 years or older. And for some reason, I have absolutely no idea why, the Judo Federation changed the age for senior black to 14. And I happened to be 14 in the year it was changed. So I did my senior black belt at the age of 14, and then within a few months they changed it back to 16, but they couldn't take away my official grading. So, and at the same camp, my father graded to his brown belt. Here's a picture of him on the screen. And my dad never went forward. He never tried to get his black belt. And he was quite happy for a few years to stay as brown before he stopped doing judo. His health wasn't very good, and he had high blood pressure, so his body wasn't up to at his age as well to strenuous exercise. Okay, but he did his grading up to brown belt and was a very good judo technician, and he was extremely good at explaining and teaching. Let me just go through what a black belt exam was like, especially in 1972. So obviously there are people who just get given their grades because they're good fighters. So that is one pathway to becoming a black belt, is through fighting. But I was never much of a fighter. We might talk a little bit about that later. But I was now one of the best judo technicians in KZN, and certainly amongst the higher few in South Africa when it came to my technical understanding of judo principles. Though I fought for many years and had a certain amount of success, I was really a technician more than a fighter. So the way it works in judo is that to get to a black belt takes quite a while. So generally, white belt to yellow belt is about 3 to 4 months. Yellow to orange, another 4 or 5 months, and so on. And generally, it would be a few months for each grading. If you had an instructor who was keen to process you through the grades and was competent to provide you with the correct training. Okay, but we now had the South African judo syllabus, right? And so progressing through the ranks became a much easier thing after this was initiated. Okay, but I'd been doing judo for a couple of years before this was even thought of. Anyway, the day comes for me to do my exam. Okay, and because of my training with Jean Pujol and my involvement in the development of the syllabus, especially in my province, I was extremely proficient. So the grading panel opted for me to demonstrate the South African judo syllabus without prompting. So what that means is I walked onto the mat with my partner, his name was Andre Boshoff, and he was my uki, okay, my partner. And I then executed the white belt grading syllabus. This is white belt to yellow belt syllabus. And I executed the 6 throws that were required and the 6 ground holds. And I did these, naming them, shouting the Japanese name out loud, and then performing the technique with no prompting from the judges who just stood there and watched and wrote down notes as I went. Then I went through the orange belt techniques, then the green belt techniques, then the blue belt, and then the brown belt. Every single technique by heart. This has never ever been done in a grading before, and I don't think it can be done since. Today, most people battle to remember half a dozen techniques, standing, groundwork, and then to remember all the strangles and all the arm locks by name. It was a major feat, which I accomplished because of the incredible coaches and the fact that they actually had shared their knowledge and helped me through it, and because of Jean Pujol and the effort that he put into my training. And I did a Ukemi kata as well, and also instruction on Tai Sabaki. So Tai Sabaki is how judo works. Sabaki means balance. Tai Sabaki is a system of breaking an opponent's balance in order to do a judo technique where you do not use strength but skill. Anyway, so that gives you a little bit of a rundown of what happened during my grading, yeah, I was extremely proud of my accomplishment of being able to do this and to do a demonstration of this kind. So we wanted to expand our judo even more, right? So we had this club up on the hill in Kloof at Thomas Moore, and I was invited to train judo at the Fulton School of the Deaf in Pinetown. Now, I'd never met a deaf person, but my father was really keen because during his early years, my father had a deaf girlfriend, and so he learned sign language. And then for quite a few years after the war, so my dad and my uncle were in the Second World War, my dad worked in a cinema, and in the cinema, the projection booth was so noisy with the machine, all the frames going past on the actual projector itself. You couldn't hear the sound of the movie. So my father watched movies without sound, and so he became very proficient at lip reading. Anyway, so he became quite keen for me to actually teach at the deaf school. I was terrified. I'd never met a deaf person, and they spoke really funny. I was like, and the scariest part when I arrived there, we put out our mat, and all these kids lined up, and they all spoke really loud and funny, and it was hard to understand what they were saying. And which is understandable because a deaf person can't hear what they say. So they learn to speak, but they can't hear what they actually say. And that's a very important part of speaking, is to hear your own voice and the words. So they were a bit scary. And so I started doing this instruction, and I couldn't control them. They were never looking at me, and when they weren't looking at me, I was speaking to them, and they weren't listening. And then this boy came up to me. His name was Richard Trezise, and he said to me, "You must stamp your foot because," and he made like gestures like, "we can't hear, so you have to stamp your foot." And he showed me, and he banged his foot on the ground, and immediately everybody stopped and turned and looked at me. So they could, because they all had bare feet to do judo, they could all feel that vibration in their feet, and they responded. So now I had a learning technique. When I wanted to say, "Okay guys, stop, I want to show you this new exciting technique," or whatever, then I just stamped my foot. So that's how it started. And what I didn't realize is that this boy, Richard Trezise, was going to become not only one of my greatest success stories, but he would actually become a sixth Dan judo, and he would go overseas and compete. And also, he brought his brother to do judo, and his brother could hear Richard Trezise, and I trained him as well. So this was pretty exciting, and even more things unfolded from that, this beginning at the Fulton School of the Deaf. My judo had come to a point where South Africa wasn't helping me enough. I still wanted to grow more. And fortunately, my parents were 100% behind me. They were my fan club. And they really pulled out all the stops for me. So my parents heard about a place called Lilleshall, and that the British Olympic team was training in Lilleshall Sports Centre, and they were sent off, but remember, no emails or anything. They sent off letters or telegrams. I don't know how they did it. Certainly overseas calls were extremely expensive. So they contacted the British Sports Committee and arranged for me to train with the British Olympic team at Lilleshall National Sports Centre in a county called Shropshire. So this was an incredible experience that I don't think it could possibly happen today, but anybody could ever have. Any little boy could have anyway. So when it came time, my parents took me to the Louis Botha Airport and in Durban, and put me on an aeroplane alone. And I flew to Johannesburg, where I then changed to a flight to England. And I arrived at Heathrow Airport and then had to catch an underground train to Charing Cross. There I had to come out and walk north to King's Cross, where I caught a coach, Greyhound bus, and it wasn't a Greyhound bus, it's an American thing, but like a Greyhound bus, north to Shropshire. And then at Shropshire, when I arrived, a sports bus came from Lilleshall and picked me up in the town. Now, Shropshire is the most beautiful little town with cobblestone streets, what it was then anyway. And so that was quite amazing. Now, I arrived there, and I was young, and most of the people training there were seniors, older people than myself. So I was actually put in the girls' dormitory, and the girls who were training for the Olympics at fencing took me in, which was quite an eye-opener for a young boy, because I was in the only showers there had no doors, and these girls were walking around topless, stuff like that. My eyes nearly fell out of my head. Anyway, having never seen a girl topless before, not having a sister, this was quite an experience. Anyway, so back to judo. I was trained with them for approximately 10 days, and I had never been instructed using a video camera. We didn't have a video camera. I'd never even seen one up close. I knew such a thing existed because we had just got television in South Africa, so it was a new thing. And so they filmed us doing our techniques, and then we would have a meeting, if you like. So all the judoka would come around, and they would play this on a TV, like a monitor television screen, and they would play your technique back, and you'd be able to see your technique yourself for the first time. It was the most incredible thing to see me doing my techniques and then having some of the best judoka in the world explaining why it's not working as well as it should and how to improve it. It was absolutely amazing. And so I had this experience and I came back to South Africa. Okay, so um, there was another guy in judo that I trained with once or twice, and he was a lot older than me, and his name was Mike Job, and he had managed to get his judo club into Cape Town schools. And so he was starting to teach in some schools, um, and he was pretty much the first person to do that. And anyway, so my father applied to the Department of Sport in KZN, and so I became an official instructor for the Department of Sport, age 14. So if you look at this picture on the screen, there's a photo of me standing next to um, Hank Volkers, who we also got from overseas. He was a Dutch judoka, and these are my students. And so this was on the front page of the Durban newspaper, that I was the youngest uh, uh, senior black in the southern hemisphere, and that I was, remember, this is apartheid South Africa, and I was teaching non-white students to do judo. So it was quite a thing. Okay, so my judo was still coming along. I was still had no aggression in me. I was never ever a fighter. From the beginning to the end of my judo career, I was always respectful of my uki. I never ever was angry in a judo fight. And many times it was the talk of the judo world. Even in the South African Championships, I would throw a person and then help them up. They actually had to enforce the rules that when the referee says mate, you're not allowed to engage with your opponent, because in theory, like in a boxing match, when the bell goes off, the referee runs in between the two people to stop them bashing each other. Well, a similar thing happens in judo as well. When the referee calls mate, you immediately must disengage. Whereas what I used to do is I used to put my hand out and help the person up off of the floor, and so on. And it was very nice for me to see that happen a few times in the 2024 Olympics. So to see that the morals and code that's set up by Jigero that judo is the gentle way, and that we're not aggressive. This is not a combat sport where the idea is to hurt your opponent. So anyway, I carried on fighting, and as you can see, I fought in under 50 kg, so my weight's going up, and got my Natal colours, represented Natal, fought at the South African champs. Okay. Now, I did a demonstration, and I did many demonstrations, but this particular demonstration resulted in a broken collarbone. I broke my collarbone in 2 places. So in all the time I did judo, the only injury I sustained doing judo was a broken collarbone. So, how did I break my collarbone? Okay, so in judo, you get thrown a lot. So you have to perfect a technique called ukemi, which is break falls. Okay, so a break fall is a way of falling so as not to get broken, right? So your body learns to fall on the ground and pretty hard as well without hurting yourself. So this is a exclusive technique to judo. And there are various different ones: Mayukemi, Yoko Ukemi, which is side breakfall, and Zempo Ukemi, my favorite. And I was the best in South Africa at doing this technique. I loved it. And at every tournament, I would be invited to do a, um, a demonstration. Okay, so I'm going to play this little video below. And so what you can see is you see a whole bunch of people, and this person's going to do a Zempo Ukemi over the top of this body of people. But it wasn't done. This is the end result. Okay, so what actually happened was all of those people would be in line with me. Okay, so we'd stand in a line, and then the demonstration would begin. And we'd all start running around in like a loop, like an oval, okay? And we would run down the center of the mat and then run back up the side and round and round. So everybody's running, okay? And then as we're running around in a loop, one person would lie down, okay? And then everybody would do a forward roll break fall over the top of that one person. And once everybody had done one, the last person would lie down on the ground. Then there were two people. And everybody would do two people, and then one person would lie down, and the people that are left would do three, and then four, and then five, and then six, and seven, all the way up to like 10 people would be lying down. And then the last person, the champion, would run and do a breakfall over the top. And in one of these demonstrations, I didn't make it. So when you watch this video, you'll see the person coming in like a javelin, flying like a spear, flying through the air and hitting the mat on the other side. And in this case, I tried to go too far, and there wasn't enough space between my height off of the ground for me to turn my body, and I landed on my collarbone, on my shoulder, and I pegged into the ground just like a spear, like a javelin, and my collarbone broke. And then my body flopped over the top of it. And I got up, and the crowd were roaring and all the rest of it. I'd broke another record, but they didn't realize that my collarbone had snapped. And I didn't really know either. I heard the sound of my bone break, but I was so hot and so warm, I didn't feel any pain for about 30 minutes after. So anyway, have a look at this Zempo Ukemi tournament. This is the final person. Okay, so Kogi Judo Club grew, and we now started to do training in Pinetown. Okay, we started off in a scouts hall, so we had our squash court where we did judo, and we now hired a scout hall. And Jean Pujol came and started teaching under our banner North Shulam Kung Fu. And Kung Fu was on Tuesdays, and Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays was judo. And we built this club up until we had about 200 members. So it was pretty hectic. So we would divide the classes up. So we would go from 6 till 7, 7 to 8. And then at some points we even started at 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 3 classes, because we just had so many students. Saturday morning would be 9 to 10, one class, 10 to 11, and 11 to 12. Okay, so we were getting bigger, and our classes were filling up. The best thing to do when you want to develop a business is marketing, right? Advertising. So we came up with a thing called the Saturday Procession. So there was a lot of organization, and my mother was very, very good at that, and my dad did most of it. I was oblivious to this because I had to do school and stuff like that. But near our home, we had a supermarket called Knowles Supermarket. So it's Knowles, really, really big supermarket. So where you are, maybe there's a very, very big supermarket, like a monster supermarket, and Knowles was one of those. It was a family-run business, and so they had a forecourt, right, like a paved area in the front of the supermarket, and they would allow us to use this. So early in the morning, we would put all our mats in our ranchero and drive the mats and put them down and get the place organized and set up the PA system and the tables and for the officials, all that sort of stuff, and then it would be ready. Okay, while this was getting ready, I would be at the judo club, and in Bamboo Lane, we would all get together and we would get our 100 or so judoka in a line. Smallest little guys in the front and the big guys at the back. So they were all beautifully sorted out. They got very, very good at being able to switch and to get themselves all in order of height. Okay, so everybody was going like this to like see who was the highest, and they would juggle themselves around. Okay, and I would then run in the front. Okay, and we would have some people because between Bamboo Lane and the supermarket there was a big traffic light and it was very busy. So parents would block off the road. Okay, so we'd all be ready, and then they would wait for the lights to change in our favor, and then the parents would block the cars, and then we would run across the street and a few hundred meters to the supermarket and onto the judo mat. And it was stunning. The photos would be taken. It would be virtually every single week, it would be in the local newspaper in the sports section. And then we would do demonstrations, throwing competitions. So basically a raffle. So a person would say, I'm going to try and do 20 throws in 60 seconds. So that's 2 seconds per throw. That's pretty amazing. Though a judo throw can be done in under 1 second. In actual fact, close to half a second from beginning to end. It's quite something that if you can move someone 60 or 70 kilograms from standing, resting standing, to lying flat on the floor in under 1 second. So that requires tremendous amount of fitness and strength. Anyway, so this is what we did, and then we would do some randori. All the different people would be fighting and throwing each other, and then there would be parents who would answer questions from other parents who would see this and say, wow, I'd like my kids to be doing judo. And that's how we promoted judo into a force to be reckoned with in our local community. Okay, so we grew even more, and so we decided to move out of a hired hall like the Scout Hall, and we acquired a supermarket. So this was a Spar supermarket that closed down, and so we had the whole premises, so we signed a lease for this place, and we put a sauna inside of the cold fridges where all the meat would have been stored. The meat lockers, we turned that into the sauna. We sorted out lockers and showers, and then we built a complete gymnasium. So I learned how to do welding. My father and I made all the equipment, so lat machines, the benches, the sit-up boards, everything were made by my father and I. So we welded everything up and we built an entire gym. And then we had a Olympic-sized judo mat, which we built ourselves as well. And then the mat was hired out to various other sports. So Budo-Ray Karate, we had instructor Derek Ridgway, and Jean Pujol was teaching North Siam Kung Fu. So Gene was still around affecting my life, and we had yoga, which we had a professional instructor, but I used to do the yoga classes. So all of the classes I used to participate in, as well as doing my own classes, um, and and um, we became the third biggest judo club in South Africa. Okay, so just a little bit about judo clubs. Okay, so basically what happens is you have to join an association at some point. Okay, it's very important that your gradings that you do are a are recognized. Okay, so you have to be a qualified instructor, and you have to belong to an association in order to give recognized gradings. Anybody can say, oh, well, you are a yellow belt, or you're a green belt, or you're a black belt, but what does that mean? It means nothing. Okay, as early jokes back 60, 70 years about about having a black belt with Charles Atlas, a big bodybuilder. This guy said he was a black belt, so, and Charles Atlas, who had this beautiful body, was like most confused because your belt's only to hold up your trousers, right? And who cares if your belt is black or brown? Anyway, so judo club has to be an amateur club, right? So this means that the club does not accept money. But judo, everything costs money in this world. So judo clubs need to be run by a judo instructor who earns a living from doing it. Otherwise, why would he do it in a day and age where your time is money? So, so judo clubs have a committee, and generally this is a parents committee made up of a chairman, secretary, and treasurer. The treasurer looks after the money of the club, and so when you end up with a club with 240 students or more, and so on. So you can see there's a breakdown of our various clubs that we had. Sultan College, I'm still teaching there. We were teaching in Kloof and Malvern and Pinetown. So when you are sitting at over 300 students, then you have to be registered and all the rest of it. So yeah, so but when you have a committee, this committee starts to give you a hard time, and this is not a pleasant thing for a sensei, an instructor, and you can actually find yourself um, fired from your own club by your committee. So, so it's quite a balancing act, and also once there's a treasurer involved, then people can steal the money and all this kinds of things. So lots of things can happen in a judo club. So I just thought I'd mention a little bit about that. Okay, so at this point in time, I was training really, really hard. You can see there's a picture of me in our judo club. So the previous pictures, there was a picture of Jean Pujol in our club, and you can see the picture on the wall behind me here is in the picture with Jean Pujol, and there's another picture of me also in our dojo. And on the floor is the mats that my father and I made. So I used to wake up at 5 a.m., go for a 5K run. Before a competition, I would increase this to 10Ks per day. And on my way back in Pinetown, there was a bakery called Waring's, and they used to make the most incredible bread, especially if you buy it at 6 a.m. Then the bread would be absolutely awesome. So hot, straight out of the oven. I'd take it home, and then when we arrived home, we would put butter on this fresh bread, and we would have a beautiful breakfast. And then from there, I would be off to school 7 a.m. and I would return home around about 3, and then begin judo at 5 p.m. And 5 to 6, I would be training children, and then if my dad decided to take over that class, then I would do weight training, and I was doing approximately 100 push-ups per session and 900 sit-ups. Then I would join in the 6 to 7, where we would be training juniors, bigger juniors up to 18 years, and then 7 to 8 would be seniors. That would be very big juniors would join that class, and also seniors going up to people in their 40s. And then twice a week, I would do karate with Derek Ridgway. And also, I was doing North Silam Kung Fu with um, Jean Pujol, and we had a student. His name was Mike, and he went on to carry on training. Mike Wilkinson, he carried on training North Silam Kung Fu in Natal for many years. And yeah, there's information about him on the internet. Okay, so what would a typical class be like at Kogi Judo? So basically, we would line up the students. So depending on the class, there could be 30 to 40 or maybe even more sometimes, especially on a Saturday morning, we would be like full up. And we do a lineup and take a bow, which is standard opening for judo class. Then we would do a warm-up, and the warm-up in our class would be about 20-25 minutes. We'd start off really light warm-up just to loosen the bones. We'd certainly do some stretching, and then we would start to do more forceful stuff, Japanese circular press up, stuff like that. Once we had the body nice and warm so that we could fall on the ground without hurting ourselves, we would then do ukemi. We would do break falls for about 10 minutes. And this would be my ukemi, yoko ukemi, zempa ukemi, and so on. And we would even do some other sort of uchikomi, where we would be thrown quite a lot. But generally, Ichikomi is doing techniques without follow through. So this is just practicing. And generally, to become good at judo, you need to be doing, let's just say, your favorite technique is Ipponsianagi, right? Underarm shoulder throw. Then you would do about 200 to 300 a day of those. So you would have a uki, you wouldn't throw them on the floor, you would do the attack all the way up to the point of throwing, so the person would actually be launched into the air, then they would drop down onto their feet, and then you would attack again. And you need to be doing 200 to 300 of those a day if you're serious about getting somewhere in your judo, so you can build up your speed and power. Okay, then you would do randori, which is not fighting, so it's mock fighting basically. It's a bit more relaxed, but more civilized, and very careful not to hurt your opponent, your uki, who's your friend. And then we would have a fun segment, and generally we would have all different techniques and things that we would do. One is Cumberland wrestling. Cumberland wrestling is something where you hug the person and intertwine your fingers behind their back. And then once you've done that and you were now forced together, there would be a ring of belts on the ground, and you would try to get the person out of the ring using whatever technique you could. Okay, but if your knee or any other part than your feet touched the ground, you lost. And if you stepped out of the ring, you lost. And then we would continue on it until we had the class champion. Okay, and it was always a lot of fun and screaming and carrying on with that. And then we would do newaza groundwork techniques, where we would do ground holds, arm locks, strangulations, overturning techniques, how to execute a ground hold, how to get out of a ground hold, and so on. And how to defend yourself on the ground from an attacker who is standing. Then we would do cool down exercises, where we would do some more stretching just to loosen up our bodies, and then we would do the lineup. During the lineup process, we would do announcements where we would talk about upcoming events, what's happening, and so on, and then bow and then everybody would go home, and so on. Okay. In the background, my mother would be getting late payers that haven't paid their fees and things like that. My mother would also be networking, talking to all the parents who would be watching, in order to keep them happy and just make sure everything is running smoothly. So at this point in time, judo took a turn. Okay, so Russian wrestlers entered into judo. So Russian wrestling, or it's a martial art called sambo, and basically this martial art is a type of judo, stroke wrestling. It's pretty much, it was developed by the military. It's how to get a person onto the ground so that you're above them in a defensive position, and it's very rough and tumble, and it's completely opposed to the principles of judo. And because judo was vulnerable to this, because of the way judo's done, um, it doesn't have any severe strikes. If a person charged at you and dived and grabbed your feet like a rugby tackle, in other martial artists, you would just lift your leg and hit the person in the face with your knee, and they would never do that again because they would be unconscious. So they would try that once with a person doing jiu-jitsu or karate or any other form, and they would certainly never attempt that again. But in judo, because it's the gentle way, we don't have techniques that we know of them, but we would never do a technique where we would purposefully hurt a person and possibly even kill them. So if a person charged at you and you then hit them with a knee blow to the top of their head, they would probably die. So in judo, we would step back to try and absorb this charge, but unfortunately they're running at you, so they will hit you and knock you over, and then they're going to wrestle you on the ground. Okay, so this was really bad. So judo went through a really bad phase, and I lost interest in fighting. So competitions were not great for me. It's just not. I was never a fighter. So, and because the judo turned into this brawl, I couldn't use my techniques to take my player down. So judo was pretty much a groundwork scenario for quite some time. But the new rules in the Olympics, which has just gone through now, 2024 Olympics, there is no leg grabs are required, otherwise you disqualified. So judo is now back to its original glory, thank goodness. Okay, so what happens in judo when you're going to go into a judo fight? What makes a person do judo? Why would they want to do judo? It's a terrifying thing, and largely it's it's a challenge. Other people might jump out of an aeroplane or do other equally scary things, but fighting in a judo tournament is very stressful activity to do. So why would you do it? So just go through it a little bit, how it's a mind over matter thing is judo. So basically you would walk onto the mat and you would bow, and then you would turn, so that would be bowing to the mat. Then you would turn and you would bow to your opponent, and they would return the bow. And then you step up to the mark and the referee says, Hajime. And the moment he tells you begin, your fears just disappear. Your anxiety, your stress, everything. You just settle down. You move into your stance. the crowd's cheering and screaming just disappears. It subsides away from your consciousness, and you enter into what other people like tennis coaches, tennis players, and so on, and other sports talk about the zone. And all of a sudden, you inside silence. Now, it's very difficult because in judo, you have to act and you have to react. So you need to react to an attack very, very fast. But when you move into your attack, you move cautiously in preparation before you launch your attack. Okay, and you've got to be very careful that you create an opening for your attack without signaling to your uki that you are going to attack. So he mustn't be able to read this attack is coming. And so you have to be a master at setting him up into a situation that when you launch the attack, it's completely by surprise. So that's a very, very important factor. Of course, when you get better, it doesn't matter whether he knows or doesn't know. Your technique is so good and you are so strong and you're so fast. There's absolutely nothing he can do about it. So that's what Olympic level is about, that they develop these techniques. But it still is fun to watch because all the competitors are at that level. Okay, so it's energy, movement, and confidence is the important thing to enable you to score. And a score is called an ippon, so that's an outright win. And if you do a score that's not quite good enough, it's called a wazari. Judo went through a terrible time where we had small scores like a koka and a yuko, and these things could be added up, and it was just a whole nightmare of cheating by referees and so on. So it wasn't a very nice period for judo to go through. All right, so I was now 60 kgs and my body was trim. I was supremely fit, and I entered into the Natal Championships under 60 kgs, won the gold. Then there was the Natal Open, where people from other provinces could come and compete and try and steal the Natal Championship, and I won gold there. Obviously, because I had gold in both, I was selected for the Natal team to go to the South African champs. Okay, in this particular year, the South African champs were at the Rand Showgrounds, which was in Mill Park, and there's a photo of it in back in the day. So I failed in one of my fights, one of my final fights, to win outright, and it was went to a judge's decision, and the corner judges decided that I hadn't done sufficient, and I lost the gold and got silver. Anyway, we then had that in the final evening, we had the South Africa versus Great Britain international event, and I was to participate in that. So the British team had come to South Africa, and I'd met Brian Jacks before in England, and so he came with Dave Starbrook, and these are two of some of the greatest names in British judo. I think no one in British judo doesn't know who Brian Jacks is, and he stayed in our home because when they traveled around South Africa, they stayed with various judoka and trained with us. And Brian Jacks wrote a book which he gave my mother autographed copy of his book. And Dave Starbrook was the heavyweight of the British team. He was pretty amazing at judo. And anyway, so we come to this night now where we're going to have Springboks South Africa versus Great Britain. And I didn't win the South African Championships. Okay, I came second. So I wasn't supposed to be in the team, but due to an injury, I had an opportunity to fight Neil Adams. And throughout the world, outside of Japan, Neil Adams is probably the most famous judoka of all time. He's even this last Olympics, Neil is a judo commentator. He's been a coach. He's been quite an ambassador. So you'll see there's a picture of him sitting on the mat when he was younger. When I fought him, he was even younger than this photo, but this is the earliest one I was able to find. And so I stepped onto the mat, and this is South Africa versus Great Britain, right? And so he threw me in 8 seconds. So from standing approximately 3 meters apart, taking our bow, from the end of the bow to me lying on the floor looking at the ceiling was 8 seconds. Okay, and so we both weighed 60 kgs, and that's quite a feat. So, but the throw itself was less than 1 second of that. So, of the 8 seconds, a few seconds were taken up with him walking forward, us getting ready, fighting a little bit for grip, though I'm not really, was never one for much of a grip specialist, so I was pretty relaxed. I just put my arms up for him to grab my sleeves, and I grabbed his, and then he moved, and I was on the floor. So the SABC camera crew missed this, so it's going to be aired on TV and circulated around the world, and the 60 kg category is not recorded. The SABC camera crew missed it. So now they're going to have on TV all the fights, one after the other, of the tournament, and the 60 kg is going to be missing. So the cameraman told an official, the official ran to the table. The table was like, everybody was on cue, was confused. Dave Starbrook, the team captain, he went over and said, like, what's the problem? And they told him what had happened. And so Dave Starbrook made an executive decision. He said, well, why don't we just do the match over? It wasn't much of a match anyway. So let's just do it over. Let's pretend it never happened. And then everybody was happy. So, and he knew I was so weak compared to Neil that there is, in no world could I have ever won that fight. So even if he actually physically had his one arm tied behind his back, I still wouldn't win. But anyway, we go back onto the fight. Neil turns to the camera and says, "Are you ready?" to the cameraman. He gives him a thumbs up. And then he turns to me and he says, "Are you ready? I'm going to do the same thing again." And I had no answer. I was ready. And he just walked up to me, and in 1 second, I was lying on the floor looking at the ceiling. And I was laughing. So I got up from the floor laughing, and I gave him a hug and said, "Oh my word." That was absolutely incredible. He had a big smile, and we went off. And yeah, most incredible experience. I'll never ever forget, but it was just a good laugh. So I continued training and trying to get a bit bigger and trying to get a bit more muscles and get better at my judo. Obviously, we built a weight training gym in our studio, and we had a Mr. Natal bodybuilder who later became a Mr. South Africa as our manager, and so I was more involved with weight training, and Arnold Schwarzenegger came to South Africa and won the 6th-time Mr. Olympia Championship in Pretoria, and he came to Durban, and there was a show called An Audience with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the Elangeni Hotel. So in the picture, there's a picture of the Elangeni Hotel, and in the penthouse, there's a like auditorium, and we did this. So what an audience with Arnold Schwarzenegger means is that it's not just like a bodybuilding show. He actually, I'd never been to one of these things. So when we arrived there was a chair, one chair on the front of the stage. And when the time came, Arnold came out and he was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. I was pretty shocked, expecting to see, a bodybuilder. And he came out and he sat on this chair, and then just chatted to us about his experiences with bodybuilding and so on. He just spoke just generally, and then he told us about how he'd started, and that Reg Parks, a South African bodybuilder who became Mr. Universe, was his idol, and that evening he was going to pose with Reg Parks. So here, the giant of bodybuilding is going to pose with a bodybuilder who is nearly 60. I think it was 50 something at that point in time. And anyway, and then we had a break. Arnold came off the stage. Mainly the people in the audience were bodybuilders and the media. So Arnold came and he actually stood amongst us, and we all had an opportunity to speak to him directly. And I said to him, I have been training so hard and I can't put on any body weight. So he listened to what I was saying, and he said, the reason that you can't gain weight is you're overtraining. I'd never even heard of such a thing. Could a person do too much training? And he said there's a balance between training and sleeping. And while you're training, you're breaking your body down. While you're sleeping, your body is building your body up. And if your ratio of sleep to training is off, your body will not be able to grow. And also, me running every single day was stripping all the weight off my body, so I was lean. So some of the other famous people that I met, but not to do with judo, was Nelson Mandela. I met the Queen many times in England, and I even met the Dalai Lama. I just competed in a martial arts bout, and I broke or severed the ligaments in my knee. So for some months, I had to have my leg in plaster. And when I came out of that, obviously I hadn't been in training, so I was off my form. And so I entered into the Northern Natal Open Championships. I'd never been to one before, and they're normally quite a small competition. So I entered into this competition where all South African steel is made. Iscor, a company that makes all our steel, and they had quite a good judo club, and so I went there to go and compete. So I didn't have a very good time of it. I wasn't in good condition, and so I won my first fight, and I said to my dad, I'm not up to this. Let's retire from the competition. And my dad said, no, come on, the competition's not that tough. You can easily make it through. So I had my second fight and I won that. And then third fight I lost. I said to my dad, that's it, let's go. And then my dad said, oh, but you know, on the repechard system, which I showed you earlier, you'll come back and you only got one more fight because, you know, you're right at the top of the path. So you just got one fight and then you win the bronze. And I said to him, no, I'm not up to it. And my dad said, come on, it'll be easy. And look at this guy, he's a low graded judoka. And really, you'll be able to beat him with ease. You know, I wasn't very happy, but my dad bullied me into it. He said, we've come all this way and it's good for you, even if you just, you know, just enjoy the fight. Even if you don't win, it doesn't matter. So just get your body back in it. So I go onto the mat, not into it at all. So mentally, I'm not there. And this other guy, he's terrified. Okay, he's looking at me. He's looking at my judo suit. He's looking at all my badges. He's looking at the black belt. I'm well known in KZN. Everybody knows who I am. I'm an instructor. I'm a referee, and he is absolutely terrified. So his coach tells him that the only way he's going to win is if he catches me by surprise. So he's got to get in there and he's got to attack me right in the beginning. And also he could see I was tired. So he said he's tired and he always starts the fight off really slowly. So just go in there and attack him really, really, really hard and you might win. So that was his strategy. However, I'm not into it. So I stroll onto the mat. I take my bow. My head's still down from the bow. I'm just starting to stand up. I'm completely relaxed. And this guy runs at me, but just charges straight at me and launches an attack. So without even thinking, not even a single thought, I drop, but like right down onto my haunches. So I drop at least 2 feet down. Okay. He then hits me. So his hip hits me on the side of the face really hard. It was really sore. It was like someone had punched me in the face. And as he hit me, I stood up. But when I stood up, I launched myself up into the air, holding onto his hips. So I went up into full standing. He is now on top of my shoulders. I turn him in the air and I threw him straight down on the ground. And he landed really on the side of his neck and shoulder. This is a bucket throw. Extremely dangerous. And it shouldn't be done because this type of technique can result in death. And if it was done on the street, a judoka, if he was being attacked, could permanently disable his opponent. Not that that is a judo technique that we would want to do, but we know how to do that. We can defend ourselves easily. So he was out. He was broken. They had to come first with a stretcher, take him off the mat, which I followed off holding his hand. He was out of it. I was upset. They called the ambulance and he got taken to the hospital. And I never heard what happened to him. And away he went. And I won the bronze medal in a fight that lasted no more than a few seconds. So I was not very proud of myself. And yeah, it was embarrassing. Some years later, after I retired from judo, my children, eldest children, Bernice and Rowan, started doing judo. They did judo for about 2 years. Bernice got an orange belt. My eldest son, Rowan, achieved a green belt. And the problem with Rowan was his weight to age ratio. So I had the advantage of it. So I was an older boy with a very, very light body, so I could become a judo champion as a youngster. Later, I was a judo champion because my skills kept abreast. Not so the As we got older, all the boys, we all grow at different rates, and so the other boys caught up. But my skills were higher, so that's how I did well. So though we were mentally and physically the same age later on, I had better skills from years of doing judo. Whereas Rowan he was heavy, which meant that he was the boy that was younger than the other boys. And that's quite a difficulty. So he did judo for about 2 years and then moved away from judo to pursue other things. He was very good at playing football and so on. So, some 10 years later, my youngest kids decided that they wanted to learn judo too. So I started teaching them. And then I took them to my student. So right in the beginning, I told you about the deaf student, Richard Trezise. And so I took my students to him, and there's a photo of Richard and my two youngest. And that was very proud for me that my student was now training my children. So was pretty special. And anyway, they won in Natal, and they represented South Africa. So off they went. So they were Natal champions, and off they went to the South African champs, which was held in Port Elizabeth. So let's talk about those fights. So Zane did really, really well. He won his way through, lost in the finals, and won a silver medal at the South African champs. That's a big deal. And in all my career, I never won a gold at the South African champs. So I thought Zane was going to outperform me, but I'm extremely proud of his achievement. Then Gillian, she had a very difficult time. So she was fighting in the open division. Okay, and she was only a little girl. She was 48 kgs, and she fought in the open weight category. And there was this girl, really rude, I suppose, which a lot of the judoka called a bubble butt. So she was a really big girl. She was 4-time South African champion. So she'd been around this was Gillian's very first time at the South African champs, and she gets drawn first fight against this mountain of a woman, and who was at least 20 or 30 kgs heavier than her. And she's the number 1 seeded champion. She's going to win, and Gillian was seeded lowest. So to get rid of Gillian out of the competition, she got drawn with this woman, the mammoth, first fight. So anyway, Gillian was in there, and this big woman was just like plodding around the mat, and nobody in the crowd, but nobody liked this woman, because all the competitors, she would just basically force them to the ground and then lie on them, and then they were stuck. There's absolutely no chance anybody was going to win a medal with her in the competition. And anyway, so Jill attacks her, and she does this technique, my favorite technique, which obviously I taught to my children, Jigero, between the legs, and it's a rear throw. And she did the technique, and this girl lost her balance a little, just slightly, forcing her to step back. And I got up and I started screaming, and I said, "Go, go, go." And as I was doing this, Gillian was doing this throw, this ouchigari, and she'd do it and push, and do it and push, and do it and push. And little by little, this girl was staggering backwards, step by step. And Jill was just not catching it. So every time she did it, was the weight was on the foot. So it didn't work. And this girl would step back, and as she tried to step back, Jill would do it again. And she just kept pushing and doing it and pushing it and doing it. And about the 6th or 7th time, this crowd was behind her now. And I'm saying, go, go, go. And the entire crowd, we're talking like 300 or 400 people, are all on their feet. And they're saying, go, go, go. And Richard's on the mat, and he's banging his hand on the tatami in time with me saying, go, and the crowd shouting, go. And this girl takes a step back, and at the exact right time, Gillian attacks the leg while it's off the ground, which is how it should be done. And suddenly, this girl didn't have a foot on that could go on the ground. Gillian had it in the air, and it was hooked. And this girl came down, but she fell down like a tree falling down after a lumberjack has chopped through the wood. And you could basically have shouted, "Tumba," as this big girl fell down. And so she fell. It was amazing. The crowd were on their feet, and the other judoka were jumping for joy. The reason is they could now win. Jill was finished. In her next fight, she lost. But the other judoka afterwards came and thanked her. The gold medal winner and the silver medal winner came and thanked Jill because she'd opened the pathway for them to win the medals, because this big woman had been taken out by the little girl from Durban. Just to wrap up, I was never a fighter. I should probably never have done judo, but I would never have been good at rugby or any of the other sports. I tried football when I was young, and I was dreadful. I became a pretty good, half decent tennis player. But for 7 years in my province, I was undefeated champion. Later, I went to Rhodes University, and I did physical education. But I got conscripted to go to the army, to do 2 years in the army, SADF, South African Defence Force. And during that time, I lost my fitness levels. So when I went into the army, I was probably the fittest person in the judo camp. By the time I was finished the 2 years in the judo, I'd gone off my peak, and not having done judo for 2 years. And so it was, the beginning of the end of my judo career, sort of forced on me. And while I was in the army, guess what? I met the guy that I put in hospital. And he came over to me. I didn't even recognize him, because our fight was like, I didn't even really see his face, to be honest. I wouldn't have been able to recognize him. But so the fight was so quick, and then off he went to hospital, and we never spoke or anything. I didn't know his name or anything. And this guy came over to me, and he just said to me, "I'm the guy you put in hospital." And I was, just a bit embarrassed, and I said, "Oh, Jan, I'm so sorry." He said, "No, all was cool." He said, he said, "I should never have attacked you like I did." And so I said, it was just pure reaction. And I was exhausted. I said, if you'd actually not listened to your coach and just made me fight, try to make me fight for the whole duration of the fight, I probably wouldn't have lasted. And because I was tired, and you would have probably won. Anyway, and he helped me get a transfer from my camp, and so I'll never forget the guy, and I still don't know his name. Anyway, it was a year later I retired from judo. So my contribution was 15 of my students became black belts, and 3 of them became 6th dan. So I've told you about Richard. and his brother John Trezise. And the two brothers were very, very good at judo. And John Trezise had a son, and Patrick Trezise, and he is now a sixth dan, and he also fought in the Olympics. So I've left a fairly, I left more um, in judo than I got out of it, I think, and that's basically what everybody in the judo family does: is you pass the ball forward. So you go into judo, you gain a lot, you gain confidence, you gain strength, you gain mental confidence in yourself, knowing who you are, and you um, become mentally strong. Um, but it's also good to put something back so that other people following behind you can also experience and learn from judo. So I hope this hasn't been too boring, and that you've enjoyed what I've had to say, and my little experience in the judo world.